Hi everyone, it's Ash from FPL Hints, here to help you construct your Wildcard 8 draft. As always, if you're able to like, share, and subscribe, that will be greatly appreciated. So before we dive into the actual draft itself, we're going to just look at the upcoming fixtures first and foremost, and no doubt that will influence the kind of players that we pick. And it's not going to just be a single set draft. I'll try and offer variations in terms of, let's say, team value, because some FPL teams may have more team value than others, and some teams might be chasing, some teams might be defending. So we'll factor that in as well. So first and foremost, with the fixtures, we can see that Arsenal, who've had a very reasonable start to the season, are going to experience some red block games from game week 9 to game week 11. But with a team like Arsenal, they're fixture proof anyway. So that's worth factoring in. And of course, generous green block run of games from game week 12 to well beyond game week 17 and 18. And then with Aston Villa, who had a generous run of green block games, especially for those that wildcarded in game week 4 and even game week 6, the fixtures are becoming a bit more mixed. And of course, they've got Champions League football as well. But on the whole, with Aston Villa, they've demonstrated, albeit to lesser degree, they're also fixture proof to some extent as well, specifically on the attacking front. So that's worth bearing in mind. You've got Bournemouth, who had some reasonable games. They're going to enter red block territory for the next 3 game weeks, followed by a generous run of green block games, which will go right into the festive fixture rush. You've got Brentford, who had a very generous run of green block games over the past 3. The fixtures, still, whilst they might be reasonable, the green block games basically cascade to every other game week. So you've got Ipswich, Bournemouth, and Leicester, 3 of their next 6 home games. And then Brighton, who had a fairly mixed bag, as it were, but have shown that they can score goals come rain or shine. Again, a few mixed games followed by a run of green block games. And you've got Chelsea with them. Fixtures are getting trickier after the generous run of games they had in their first 6 or 7. That'll be followed by a relatively reasonable run of green block games for the festive period. But again, with the likes of Cole Palmer, no doubt he's fixture proof. You've got Crystal Palace with them. Finally, some green block games. I think their opening run was fairly difficult, and that's reflected in their form that they've had, and also with their position in the table. So no doubt that is worth factoring in as well. And then you've got Everton, who've already had their run of green block games start, which will continue well into the festive fixture rush. You've got Fulham, who put up a very interesting fight against Man City in the recent game. I'd say, on the whole, the fixtures, I wouldn't call them generous, but they're reasonable to some extent. And Ipswich have already entered their generous festive fixture, well, generous, beg your pardon, green block run of games, which saw D-Lap score 3 goals in the past 2 games, and that's going to continue with what we can see there. And Leicester, as with the case of Ipswich, newly promoted team, and they've got a healthy number of green block games that are coming up. And then Liverpool, who actually had a very generous run of green block games up until the first 6 or 7 games, their fixtures do become trickier. You've got Chelsea, Arsenal, got Brighton, Aston Villa, and Man City in 5 of their next 6 games. I mean, let's push it to Newcastle at St James's Park. That's 6 of the next 7, which will get tricky. You've got the Merseyside derby as well, to make that 7 of the next 8 are tricky. And then pushing it further, you've got Tottenham away as well, further in the horizon. So the fixtures from Liverpool's perspective, of course, add it up with Champions League football as well. And that's, of course, dovetailed with the international breaks. It's a very tricky run of games for Liverpool. Of course, they've got fixture-proof players like Mohamed Salah, but if we're being honest, his form has been patchy of late, especially in this early part of the season. Of course, he scored a healthy number of points, but it's almost as if his points are concentrated in specific games rather than a consistent flow of fantasy returns as we have expected from Mo Salah of old. So that is a big concern for those that are considering Liverpool assets. You've got Man City, very generous run of green block games, and with them, that is definitely worth factoring in mind. Again, Champions League football as well, and other commitments are worth bearing in mind. And then Manchester United, who've just had one of the worst ever starts to their domestic seasons in, I think, in almost living memory. They, dare we say it, have some generous games coming up, but then I wouldn't read too much into their green block games, especially considering how patchy their form has been, but nonetheless, they are green block. And then you've got Newcastle United, who had a very good, reasonable start in terms of the fixtures and also a bit of form. I'd say the fixtures are somewhat mixed. And Nottingham Forest, this elongated green block run of games that will continue on for them with the likes of Crystal Palace, West Ham, and Newcastle at home in 3 of the next 4. You've got Southampton, who have a few green block games, but for the most part, with their players, if we're being generous, they're basically bench fodder. And then you've got Spurs, who, again, if I'm saying that they've had a mixed start, I'm probably being a bit generous, but mixed nonetheless. And the fixtures appear to be mixed for them on the horizon. And then you've got West Ham, again, mixed bag of fixtures for them as well. But lastly, the one that, in terms of upside, in terms of opportunity, I direct your attention to Wolves. Of course, they've got Man City in game week 8, but look at that generous run of green block games. They've had a very tricky start. Interestingly enough, with them, under their regime, it almost feels as if that they know they're going to lose certain matches, but they're just going to go out and almost score their way out of trouble. And whilst that's not really worked for the most part, considering that the opposition they've had in the first 7 games or so, it's definitely worth bearing in mind in terms of the players that are available at hand. So, with all of that said, I'm going to crack on with the actual construction of this wildcard game week 8 draft. Again, there were opportunities for those who wildcarded in game week 4 and for those that wildcarded in game week 6. You're not leaving it too late with a wildcard 8, as it were. You're not leaving it too late with a game week 8 wildcard. So what I'm going to do is present to you the options that are available to you. Now, I did mention Wolves right there, and I think it'll be a bit like crazy for me to not mention the one player that I've literally wanted to pick from pre-season, and it's Ait Nouri, of course, playing in a very advanced role. And as we can see, his form has been very interesting this season. 2 goals and an assist in his last 2 games, and he's had very difficult games on top. He's, of course, had an additional assist at the start of the season. Also, he was getting subbed off at times as well, which could be good from a clean sheet standpoint. But then look at the fixtures he had: Arsenal, Chelsea, Newcastle, Villa, Liverpool. And despite that, 2 goals and 2 assists seems like fantastic value. 4.4 million. Of course, you're not going to start him against Man City for the first match back after the international break, but you have to strongly consider getting Ait Nouri in terms of the value and upside that he offers. So again, went straight in with that particular pick. You're looking at the other options. Would I consider a goalkeeper? Johnston at 4.4 million. If I wanted a rotating goalkeeper, I think he definitely does fit the bill. But what I'm going to do for this first draft is actually stick with 2 goalkeepers from the same team. And for those that are in the know, you'll know who I'm already talking about. So yeah, let's not waste too much time. Of course, we're going to have Haaland in this draft because of the generous run of games that Man City have. And also, we are going to have Rico Lewis as well. In some ways, yes, Rico Lewis is somewhat of a rotation risk. And we almost spend a lot of our Saturday mornings wondering if he's going to start, let alone the number of points that he's going to score. And it's not really been that great from a points perspective, considering the fixtures that he's had. But that assist against Fulham, at least it was something. Ultimately, considering Kyle Walker's age and, of course, the Rodri injury as well, it kind of opens up some opportunities for Rico Lewis to hopefully start, if not all of those games, a lot of the upcoming games. And worst case scenario, when you've got Rico Lewis, just make sure you've got a playing sub 1. So fairly content with keeping him in right there. So on to the next player, who isn't actually in my own FPL draft at this moment in time, unfortunately. And he is fixture proof, as he's demonstrated over the past 2 or 3 seasons. It's Bukayo Saka. I think no nonsense pick. Yes, we know that he's got those 3 red block games coming up, but he's fixture proof, and I don't think that should be an issue. So on to the next player. And what I'm going to try and do with this initial draft is try and get as many big hitters as possible, and then I'll balance it out as well as we go along. So the other player, I'm just going to, in fact, I'll just go to Brentford, because in this particular draft, I'm going to have a flurry of Brentford players. I'm going to have Flecken, Valdemarson as a Brentford triple up, and to complete that triple up, it will be Brian Mbeumo. So in he comes. Again, Mbeumo's form has been fantastic this season, stepped up to fill the void, considering that Wissar got injured and Tony has left, and he scored in 3 of his last 3 games. And yeah, the fixtures, there's 1 red block game between now and early December, which I think is fairly reasonable, and then a few more that will come up during the festive period. But on the whole, you could pretty much be confident in starting him in all of those games. So he makes sense if you haven't already got him in. So again, I know I've tripled up on Brentford here, but at the same time, I'm going to try and keep this as diverse as possible. Going to go to Chelsea, and with Chelsea, the only premium that comes to mind is someone who isn't playing in the European squad for the time being. It's Cole Palmer, 10.8 million now, 6 points in his last game week. Again, 25 point was an outlier, 8 points before that, and you got a 17-point haul as well. With him, you know what you're getting with him: 6 goals and 5 assists in his first 7 games. I think that's absolutely incredible. Of course, you've got Liverpool in that next game, and Newcastle, and Man United, and Arsenal. So it will get trickier for him. So in another variation, I will get rid of him. But I think for this particular draft, I think it makes sense to keep Cole Palmer. So the next player I'm going to try and force myself into a 3-5-2 formation here. And I'm going to go to a midfielder. There we go. So Morgan Rogers, 5.3 million now. Seems to be X-Min's safe, is picking up returns slowly now as well. I think the good thing with him is you've got the peace of mind that he is the perfect sub-1 fifth midfielder in FPL this season. I don't have him in my current draft, but if I can force my way into a 3-5-2 formation, he is one player that I'd absolutely would want to have. Talking of which, I'm going to stay with Aston Villa, and I'm going to go to Ollie Watkins, 9.1 million now. Of course, they've got Champions League football, and the form of late, he's got 4 goals in his last 4 games, albeit he blanked against Manchester United. Fixtures are reasonable enough. He's got a healthy number of goal involvements last season. I think it's 37, I think, in the end, with all things considered. So trying to make sure I can get it to work as well. So already we've got Saka, Palmer, Watkins, and Haaland in this draft. So clearly I'm not going to get Mohamed Salah. And I've explained that Liverpool's fixtures get really tricky. And if Mohamed Salah isn't getting fancy returns week in, week out, then I think there is a justification here to not pick him in this Wildcard 8 draft. So with that, just going to get another midfielder. And if I can just find him, there he is, Semenyo. So I did mention Bournemouth fixtures are going to get super tricky. Got Arsenal, Aston Villa, and Man City. Then the Green Block games return as well. So I think this might be a bit of a hard ask in some respects, but I'm going to pick him for the time being for this initial attacking draft. And I also need a 4.5 million forward because I'm going to force myself into the 3-5-2 as I mentioned. Stewart is a bit of an injury concern, unfortunately, and he was the player that I had in mind. And he actually started, if I'm not mistaken, against Arsenal as well. So I'm going to pick him temporarily just as a placeholder player. In terms of minutes played and points scored, it's literally him and a few others. So yeah, if you're going to have a light bench, just keep in mind that he may not be sustainable for the long haul. So that leaves me with £15 million to spend on 3 defenders. So we'll come on to our defenders now. We'll go to let's just go to the trending players for the time being as well. So you've got James Justin. We've seen the generous run of games that Leicester have, and we can see that he's chipped in quite nicely of late as well. So he is on the radar. Konate, I can't consider because of the red block games. Can't with Van de Ven with patchy form. Got Gvardiol there, 5.9 million. So ideally, considering that I've got a weaker sub forward, I want to really boost my options here. So the player I had in mind actually was an Arsenal player, but I'm just trying seeing if I've got some variation here. So you got Wout Weiss, 4.1 million. It's Gahey actually, who I do want to consider. 4.4 million. Fixtures do turn for Crystal Palace, and Konsa would have been the other one potentially, but then picked up an injury in the last match. So I think that's a nice like-for-like replacement, which leaves me with 10.6 million to spend on the remaining 2 players. You've got Pedro Porro there as well. But I think the issue is the lack of clean sheets. He's not had any goal involvements in his last 7 games. So apart from the goal against Leicester in that opening game, so I'm not really super keen to get him in. And then you've got some other Arsenal assets there as well, but just mindful of the red block games. I think rotation is an issue as well for certain teams, especially with Champions League football. Just going to go on the other page to see what the other options are in terms of trending players. You've got Akanji, yeah, there's not a lot going for me in the other options. So I might force myself into a premium defender and a 4.0 or 4.1 defender. So we know that Leicester have some generous games. Would I want to start a Leicester defender? Probably not. Let's just push it to a 4.6. I think one player I'm going to get who is in my team and restore him is Anthony Robinson. I think he's shown his prowess in terms of attacking capability. So it leaves me with 6 million on the dot for a defender. And that, in my books, 6.0 is a premium defender in FPL this season with the way that the pricing has worked. And then we got Saliba as an option right there. So with this initial draft, look at that. Budget's been maxed out. I've got a premium defender in Saliba, followed by the likes of Rico Lewis, Robinson, Gahey, Aït-Nouri. So not a single 4.0 defender in this draft. And with all things considered, I've got PALMER, SAKA, Watkins, and Haaland. And then on top of that, Semenyo and Rodgers as well. Again, just be mindful of the fact that there will be, some say that price rises aren't as aggressive during international breaks because a lot of managers are using their wildcards, but I very much doubt that there'll be enough time to get this team due to price rises that are imminent and price falls for certain players. So fairly happy with this first wildcard draft where, yeah, man, like in that first game week back after the international break, you'd start Gahey, you'd start Saliba, and you'd start Rico Lewis. Robinson would be the sub one. You'd start all of the midfielders there. Got Watkins and Haaland up top, and Stewart, of course, will be the perennial sub 3 in this iteration. So with that, I think that there is a lot of balance here. If you look at the strengths, clearly there is a very healthy amount of balance with all things considered. The weakness here is the fact that there is no Liverpool coverage, which will be a significant issue if they basically plough on with a generous run of form somehow, considering they've got the red block games and also the Champions League football. So if they can somehow muster through that and they do well, there's no Liverpool coverage, which will cause issues. The opportunities as well. You've got the opportunity with Ait Nouri. You've got the opportunities with the fact that you've managed to fit in 4 players who I'd from the attacking side who I'd consider like full-on premiums with PALMER, SAKA, Haaland, and Watkins. And the threats to the overall rank, I would say that I just go straight to the percentages actually to show you what the actual threats are with this particular draft. So just getting it up here. So yeah, I've covered Arsenal defenders. No Trent could be a big issue here. Also Pedro Porro, if he hits the ground running eventually. And then from the midfielders, no attacking Liverpool cover, as I mentioned, when they're owned by almost 3 in 4 managers. They've either got Mohamed Salah or Diaz. And then from the forwards, I'd say I'm fairly covered on the forward side. So I think this is a very interesting draft. And I think it's definitely worth considering if you've got nothing to lose. So if I wanted to vary it slightly, I would get rid of Stewart because I think as a sub 3 with a festive fixture rush, that could be somewhat of an issue. And let's just try and fit in Luis Diaz into this team. So I need to downsize one of the players. So I'm going to force myself into picking a 4.5 midfielder potentially. So yeah, on the whole, with that initial draft, I think that's fairly like good on the whole. But let's just get some variation here as well. So do I need Arsenal defensive cover? I think it is quite essential, but let's just have a look at Arsenal players and minutes played as well to see what other options I've got. Got Timber, who's yellow flagged. I think Calafiori would be an X-Min's issue, albeit he started recently. So I think it's not worth it just dropping an extra 0.2 or 0.5. So let's just stick with Saliba there. I also want to invest more in Wolves players because of the generous fixture run. So yeah, Strand Larsen is a player that has caught my eye, as well as Cunha. But Cunha, I think he's just too expensive at 6.5 million. I think that is a bit crazy. So let's just try and make it work with Strand Larsen. So with that, 0.9 off. So I need to downsize a player here. So if I'm forcing myself into a 3-4-3 formation, Rodgers would have to go, of course, which is okay because I've already got Watkins as my attacking Aston Villa cover. So I need a 4.5 playing midfielder now. Got Dibbling, recently started playing matches. I think definitely does make sense. He's 4.6 million though, so we can make it work. So you've got 3 forwards, 4 midfielders, 0.2 off. So I need to downsize a player here. So let's just get rid of Semenyo, just like devil's advocate that the fixtures are trickier for Bournemouth, but we need a playing midfielder. So if we just go to transfers in to see the trending players in this price range, might have to get Rodgers after all, actually. So looking at the options, Bonote, yeah, not fully invested in him. I'm not going to get Kovacic, 5.5 million. Well, I can't afford him either. I think it might have to be Rodgers, actually. So, yeah, I mean, there might be instances where I'd want to start dibbling over Rodgers, and looking at the actual fixtures as well. I'd want to start dibbling in 8, 10, and 11. And Rodgers, I'd want to start in 9 and 12. So I think it could work potentially with a bit of rotation. Strand Larson, I could bench him in that initial game week back after the international break. So in fact, Rodgers and Dibbling could start in a 3-5-2. So defense, I've not really changed it. I'm just looking at the trending players. I did mention somehow getting a rotating goalkeeper. So let's try and make that work as well. But just want to look at the defenders on top as well. So in this particular draft, let's just try and downsize one of the players. So yeah, reluctantly, I wouldn't want to do this, but actually, let's get Justin in as well in this draft. And let's get a 4.0 defender as well. Just look at Wout Weiss, 4.1 million. So get him in as well. It's just unlocking some funds. So there we go. I think I've managed to make it work. So goalkeepers, just confirming it here. If I can find the Wolves goalkeeper. Johnston, where is he? There he is, 4.4 million. So in this alternative draft, I've got two rotating goalkeepers, albeit for the game week back after the international break. It's going to be a tough ask, but pick one of Johnston or Flecken. And then you've got the Wolves triple up ultimately. That's why you've done it. So Strand Larson, Ait-Nouri, and Johnston. The defense, of course, does become a bit weaker. Of course, I probably don't want a double up of Leicester assets. So in fact, I'll quickly get another defender. That's 4.1 million. I think I'll go for Greaves if he's there. There he is, 4.1 exactly. So yeah, with this, the default is of course a 3-4-3 formation, but you then effectively flip between Dibbling and Rodgers. And then the defense, you've got Lewis, Saliba, and Ait-Nouri as your starting defenders. And of course, with James Justin, you of course would want to start him in the event that one of those defenders has a tricky game. So obviously, for the first game back, you'd start Justin, Lewis, and Saliba. And then, like I mentioned, you'd start Rodgers, Mbeumo, Palmer, Dibbling, and Saka with Watkins and Haaland up top. Strand Larson would be your sub one back. Ait-Nouri would be the sub 2, and Greaves would be the sub 3 potentially. So there you have it. I've given you two variations in terms of drafts for a Game Week 8 wildcard. Let me know in the comments below what you think. And just as a reminder, the FDR that I used in the first part of the video is from FPL.team. Be sure to check their planning tools out and be sure to give them a follow on their social channels. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Have I got the balance right? Have I got the balance wrong in either of those two drafts? And what are your planning ideas for Game Week 8 wildcard? Or if you haven't got one, what are you going to do? And as always, if you're able to like, share, and subscribe, that will be greatly appreciated. Take care and all the best.